So, since the World Cup is happening right now... Yeah, of course it's the Quidditch World Cup. What other World Cup would I be talking about? Okay, since the Quidditch World Cup is happening right now, I wanted to go over a brief history of the game of Quidditch, as described in Quidditch Through the Ages by Kennilworthy Whisp. It's actually interesting because this is the actual book that came from the Hogwarts library. I mean, if you look in it, look at the first page, it says that it was borrowed by Oliver Wood, Marcus Flint, Cedric Diggory, Angelina Johnson, Terry Boot, Ernie Macmillan, Katie Bell. Oh wow, down there Fred Weasley, Hermione Granger, Harry Potter borrowed it on the 11th of March. Anyway, this book goes through the history of the game of Quidditch, and I just wanted to go through a few highlights, things that I especially like from this book. First of all, it talks a little bit about why the flying broomstick came to be. Like, why did wizards choose brooms over bathtubs, or over like magic carpets like you see in the East? Well, it seems that medieval wizards chose broomsticks because they were discreet and easy to hide if muggles came along. But onto the really good stuff. Of course, once broomstick technology, or I don't know if you'd call it technology, but once flying broomsticks became advanced enough for people to actually make good turns and adjust their speed and really control their flying, different games and sports arose. In Sweden, in the 10th century, an annual broom race started, and that even continues to this day, with racers flying over 300 miles. Also, in medieval Germany, a game named Stitch Stock was created. This game consists of a dragon bladder being stuck on the top of a 20-foot pole, and then players being on their broom, one of which is the bladder guardian, and that person is trying to keep the bladder from getting poked with the pointy ends of the other player's brooms. This bladder guardian is tied to the pole and can't go more than 10 feet from it. The bladder guardian's objective was to protect the bladder by either hexing opponents or making the game last long enough that the opponents collapse from exhaustion. This game only lasted a couple hundred years and doesn't continue today. In Ireland, a game called Angingine, I think, was played. In this game, each player would take his or her turn flying through a series of barrels in the air that were set on fire. They would be holding a ball, and then the objective was to get through all of the flaming barrels and then throw the ball into the last barrel without getting caught on fire. So the fastest player to do so without getting caught on fire would win. Another ancient broomstick game began in Scotland, and this one is called Creothean, I think. I don't know. This one's a little bit scary. So in this one, the players would have a cauldron on their head. So they'd strap a cauldron on their head, and then up to 100 charmed rocks would fall from where they had been hovering above the playing field, and then the goal was to catch as many of the rocks in your cauldron hat as possible. Scottish wizards thought that it was an amazing test of manliness, and I just think it was stupid. That's why this game was only really popular in the Middle Ages, and then it was actually made illegal in 1762. And then there were a couple of popular broomstick games in England. Shunt Bumps was one of them. This game was pretty much just a form of jousting on brooms, where the goal was to knock all of the other players off their brooms. And then Swivenhodge was a game where players would sit backwards on their brooms and use the back of the brooms, the sweepy part. What does that even have a name? I don't know. Anyway, they'd use the sweepy part of the broom basically as a racket to hit a ball over a hedge, and whoever drops it, the other team gets a point. Swivenhodge is actually still played a little bit, but it isn't quite as popular as Quidditch. Quidditch actually gained its name from the place where it originated, namely Quidditch Marsh. There's a record of some of the very first games of Quidditch played, or the games at Quidditch Marsh. In this case, they had a leather ball and would just simply fly on their brooms and try to score by passing the ball through different branches of trees. It evolved from there, and at one point they started enchanting some rocks to go after the players. early forms of bludgers. In only about 100 years, where the next big record we have of Quidditch, you can see that the game became a lot more like what it is today, and that people played competitively. In a record from that time, we actually find that they were calling what we now know as chasers catchers, and they were calling what we now know as bludgers blooders. Also, in those 100 years, they developed goals made out of barrels on sticks rather than just shooting through the trees. Although Quidditch didn't really become what we now know as Quidditch until the golden snitch was added. The story behind that is that there is a fantastic beast called the golden snidget. The golden snidget is a small, plump golden bird that is very good at hiding and fly at great speeds. Because of that, snidget hunting actually became a very popular wizarding sport. Many people were in fact opposed to snidget hunting because usually the snidget did not survive after being caught and crushed by the hands of the captain. The snidget was introduced into the game of Quidditch in 1269, when the chief of the Wizards' Council, named Barbarous Bragg, brought a golden snidget in a cage, released it onto the pitch, and offered 150 galleons to whichever player caught it during the game. So, the very first game with a golden snidget was played, and at that point, the crowd members had to use repelling charms to keep the snidget from leaving the Quidditch pitch. This idea that Chief Bragg had changed the game of Quidditch, and it became what we now know it as. Soon, golden snidgets were released during every game, and each team had its own hunter, what we now know as a seeker. The hunter had the sole job of catching the golden snidget, and unfortunately, killing it. At which point the hunter's team would be awarded an extra 150 points, probably in memory of the 150 galleons offered during that first game played with the golden snidget. At this point in time, the crowd still needed to use repelling spells to keep the golden snidget on the Quidditch pitch. About 100 years later, however, they realized that golden snidget population had fallen drastically, and they decided to make the golden snidget a protected species. This led to the invention of the golden snitch by someone named Bowman Wright. Oh my gosh, he has the same last name as me. Maybe we're related. That would be so cool. Bowman Wright was a skilled metal charmer and decided, instead of finding a different type of bird to replace the golden snidget, that he would make a metal version of it. The golden snitch he made was an object that could mimic the behavior and flight patterns of golden snidgets, and also were about the same size and weight. However, the golden snitch is actually bewitched to stay within the Quidditch pitch, so the crowd no longer has to worry about that. So at this point in the 14th century is when the game of Quidditch was finally born, at least as we now know it. There have been some changes since then, and you could read all about them in Quidditch Through the Ages. This is a very entertaining book that tells all of the backstory about where Quidditch came from, changes they've made, specific rules, and it even has a list of difficult moves that if you play Quidditch, you could try them yourself. I remember reading this book in 8th grade, and I really enjoyed it, and I think it's really entertaining. I have the old 2001 version, so it's like 17 years old, but I do know there are newer versions out there as well. Anyway, thank you for watching my video. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned a little bit about Quidditch and its history. Definitely like this video and subscribe to my channel. You can subscribe by clicking here. You can also check out some of my other videos, like I have an entire playlist full of Harry Potter videos, and up here you can check out my latest Harry Potter video. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next Monday.